member of the Bad Seeds. He's a known composer, an awarded composer, and as of late, he is an author. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Warren Ellis.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How are you? All right. Very good. It's lovely to be here. I'm sorry, I can only speak English. So, are we going to be okay with that? All right, good. I won't feel so bad. But if something is confusing, just yell out and ask what the fuck I'm talking about, and I'll try and answer it the best way that I can. But it's lovely to be here, and why don't we kick it off?
Let's kick it off. Let's kick it off with the end of the Carnage tour. I saw you 2 weeks ago in Antwerp, finishing the Carnage tour. How did it feel to be back on stage after this dreaded period?
It was extraordinary to get to the end of the tour. Did anybody come and see that concert? Yeah. Okay, so I was there too. Why didn't you wave? You should have said hello. Fuck. It was amazing to actually complete the tour. Seemed like a miracle to us because if anybody caught COVID, we had to shut the whole thing down. So seeing our crew, who were incredible, they did everything in masks. They were so kind of aware, loading in and out and all that stuff. Was really moving to see that. And I have to say, for me, the lockdown period after the whole pandemic thing, after the kind of shock of what the fuck's happening and are we all going to die, what's going on, I just sort of hauled myself up and wrote a book, and I made a record with Marianne, and Nick and I did Carnage. I found that working for me was what I needed to do in order to kind of shut out what was going on, because I couldn't do anything about it, and it sort of opened me up to, I guess, a creative side of myself that I wasn't aware of, and a sense of community that I wasn't really aware of before either. Getting back out touring, it was funny. Getting in a rehearsal room, I'd been in the studio with Nick making soundtracks and making Carnage and working, so that was going on for me. But when I got on in the rehearsal room and started playing, there was something I was like, fuck, I've really missed that. I love going to the cinema. I don't drink anymore. I don't go out. I don't have any friends, so basically lockdown was kind of like my life anyway. I just don't see the Bad Seeds as much, I was really moved actually. And then when we started rehearsing it, and to actually play in front of people and to watch everybody trying to work out how to do it all again was incredibly moving. And I think it was, for me, one of the great tours of my life. Not only because of what happened, I think, on stage and the sort of material that we were attempting to perform, but the fact that you could sense this thing in the audience. There was this sort of communion that went on beyond regular shows, and it's a bit like what my book is. I don't know how many people have actually read my book. Is it half of you? Yeah. So the book is about a concert that I saw in 1999, where this incredible communion happened. A communion, and it was a concert of Nina Simone, and she was nearing the end of her life, and I'd been, she was just like someone that I just absolutely looked up to, in the same way as John Coltrane or Lou Reed or Alice Coltrane or Miles Davis. Most of us are just swimming around in the mud in our creative world. I'm one of them. I'm just sort of crawling along the bottom. And then you've got these people who are up there, and Nina Simone is just up there, untouchable, unquestionable. And so I found myself at this festival that Nick had curated, and I'd recently been in the Bad Seeds and playing with him. He curated this festival, and Nina Simone, he booked her, and she turned up. And it was clear when she arrived that she was frail. Whether she was even going to be able to do the show was debatable. But what we all witnessed that night was a concert that changed everybody's life. It was this, and it had an effect on me. It was like when I heard the Velvet Underground. My life was never the same after that. Like I knew when I first heard them that things weren't going to be the same after that. And maybe you have that with films. I'm like that with The Colour of Pomegranates, the Parajanov film. You just know that there's things that you see or you listen to, and the world changes and something shifts inside you. And this concert had that effect on me. And at the end of the concert, I took a chewing gum and took it home and kept it for 20 years. And it became a kind of spiritual totem for me that I just was aware of, that it sat in my cupboard, that we sat in the towel that she wiped her forehead with in a Tower Records bag that a friend gave me who was at the concert I was sitting next to. And it sat there for years just as this thing that I basically felt my kind of devotion to it. It was responsible for my creative output. So it was a kind of big thing, but absolutely nothing. And I kept it to myself, this whole thing about it. And then Nick asked me if there was something I'd like to put in his exhibition in Stranger Than Kindness, this exhibition in Copenhagen. And I said, well, would you like that piece of gum? And he's like, fuck, man, that's what this exhibition is about. It's essential. And so that's kicked off this. I don't want to tell you what the book's about, but I realised I had a holy relic on my hands, that this thing had been touched by Nina Simone, and I always thought that there was something sacred about it. But as people found out about it, they reinforced that idea, and I could see the way that people got underneath it and people wanted to protect it. And I 2 days ago, I've got a I haven't got it here, but I've got a picture. The curator at the Royal Danish Library sent me a photo of it, wrapped up, ready to go on tour. We've had this month-long discussion. She's like, I can't take it. It's going to kill me, Warren, this piece of gum. Because she would get up in the middle of the night to check that it was still behind the glass. And these things were just incredibly beautiful for me to watch unfold around this thing that I loved and cared about. But to see other people take that, and that love and care was the thing that kind of gave this beautiful idea of flight. And when you look at it, it's absolutely nothing. It's gum. What people are protecting is nothing. And nothing is everything sometimes. And this is what I see in the studio with ideas. For an idea to take flight, people have to get underneath it. We are ideas. This is what I come to believe, that we are ideas. We are all just ideas walking around. Whoever we come into contact with can draw out our better self. And my whole creative life has been about that. And I realised this writing the book, that I could have been a manager in a McDonald's when I was 18, but somebody's just said, fuck, Warren, you have something. A flute teacher I had, he was like, what are you going to do? And I said, I've been offered a job at McDonald's. Because I'm from a working class family. I worked from the age of 6 or 7. I did a paper round and then delivered library overdue cards and then worked in a McDonald's, bought my school books, did all these things that I'm really grateful that I had to do this sort of stuff. But I needed to get a job and work, and they said, do you want to be a manager? So I told my flute teacher that, and he's like, don't be a fucking idiot. And I'm like, what? And he goes, Don't be a fucking idiot. You have something. Go down to Melbourne. I'll set up an audition. Now, if that guy had said to me, like, yeah, okay, manage it, go and do it, I would have done it. And I just think that, in writing this book, I realised that the trajectory of my life was changed by coming into contact with people who cared. So yeah, I guess that's what it's about anyway. And a bunch of other stuff. There's a bit of sex. No sex. A bit of drugs. No, I left the drugs and all that shit out of it because it's not interesting, And it's not a book about me. It's a book about nothing, but that nothing can be everything. It's a book about how you can take a leap, the biggest leap you've ever taken, based on knowing nothing at all about what you're about to do. For me, it's a book about, it wasn't about, it's not a memoir. I didn't want to write a memoir at all. In fact, it repulsed me to think of the idea of doing that. And I weirdly wrote this fragmented kind of memoir, looking at why I care about music. And then I realised that, I was raised to believe in God. My father said prayers every night. I went to church once a week or once a month, I think, or something like that, and then I'd steal the wine from the altar and we'd all get pissed outside and smoke a few cigarettes and eat all the wafers, all the hosts. And, I was told there was a God, but somehow I transferred that to music. And music became a spiritual quest for me. When I heard John Coltrane, I believe, and I still believe, that it was the voice of God. And this book is about my attempt to, I guess, define my place in the world, find some sense of spirituality, because without that, for me, I don't get what it's about. I couldn't understand what a God was, but I could make my own gods. And you make the world that you want to see.
That's nice. You dedicate the book to your teachers. You told us about your music teacher. Nowadays, if I want to get to know the work of Nina Simone, I just type in Spotify Nina Simone and I get the whole back catalogue. In your day and age, it was different. You had to have someone teach you where to find the records and the tapes and the recordings.
Yeah, I guess it was my age is last century, I guess, but anything pre the internet, I think it was a different struggle. But still, even with the internet, you need to be shown where to go. I mean, it doesn't mean, it means fuck all that you can have world distribution on Spotify. If nobody can find you, if you're some little band or some little performer, or you've made a little film, if nobody can find you because nobody said, hey, this is really awesome, check it out, it doesn't mean anything. So it's even a bigger struggle, I think, because there's just such a mountain of shit these days that's released all the time, So in some ways there's an accessibility that's fantastic. Like if I want to listen to Miles Davis, I can listen to records I never would have been able to hear ever, I'd have like 3 records and I would just play them back and forwards, like inside and out. A record for me in the 70s and the 80s was like, something sacred. I know every little detail, every crack in it, every pop. I can, and I know with people I play, I know with Nick, I can talk to him. He goes, that click in the solo in Let's Spend the Night Together on Aladdin Sane. I go, hey, fuck, I know that one. And he's like, yeah, like that. Like we have, there's these beautiful little details in something that you've just slaved over, and listened to. And I have that conversation with a lot of people I know that love music. But yeah, back you had to sort of settle with what you could get. But for me, it was the record shop. It was the radio station. It was people who told me about things. So I dedicated the book to teachers whoever they may be, people that help you find your better self. That person that said, hey, this is really good, because a lot of your school life, everybody just seems to be saying like, you're not good enough, you're not this, or this isn't good enough. But you remember the teacher that says, this is really cool what you've done here. You remember that, or this idea you've written down. Affirmation has such an incredibly powerful effect. And I know that's so simple and obvious, but you tell someone they look awesome, you'll make their day. A simple thing like that, fuck, you look great. It can change the way that they interact with somebody. And so after I wrote this, it seemed so obvious that the book, I'd been sort of guided by all these teachers that I'd come across, whoever they were, Mick Guy or people I played with, like when I met Nick, that was a really defining moment for me. Here was a band that I absolutely thought were like one of the best bands that walked the planet. The next thing, I'm invited into the studio just after a meal with my mate Mick, who knew Nick, and he's like, I heard you play the violin, do you want to come in? It was as simple as that. So, I end up in the studio with a bunch of people who I've seen a lot of times, and I'm absolutely like overwhelmed and terrified. And then I just thought, well, I've been asked in here, there's not much point acting like a fanboy or something, So I think I had a bit of speed, and then I kind of went back out like a lot, and they couldn't get rid of me. But yeah, for me, these teachers that we have, these people, and we have them, I think, all our life if we open ourselves to them. Yeah, and actually I was a teacher for 18 months. I did this trip. I fell in love and it didn't work out, like really didn't, and I got so 20-year-old depressed sort of thing, like I was a bummed out dude in Scotland in the middle of winter with a fucking violin. And I was in the street, like playing all this contemporary atonal music that I was improvising in my head, and it was just, like hell on earth, and I think I was trying to write poetry at the time, and it was terrible as well. Like somebody threw it all in the bin and did the world a favour. And I came back from this trip, but this trip I had over in Europe changed my life, because I kind of had these experiences with music playing in the street that kind of, I played a violin. You couldn't pick it up at a party and play Stairway to Heaven. Or, hang on. If you, it can be a bit, intimidating. You rock up to a party and you go sort of. You're trying to play Ziggy Stardust. Try and play Ziggy Stardust at a party on a violin, and it gets that kind of reaction, You pull it out on a guitar. So I was playing all these instruments that didn't fit in with the kind of punk and AC/DC and Bowie and all that stuff I was listening to. And then I had this experience playing in the streets, playing folk music that kind of people responded to, and then I came back broke, became a teacher, but at the same time I was developing a nasty kind of relationship with opiates and alcohol, and so I had 3 careers going on at the same time, and the teaching lost out, and I put a pick up on my violin and continued with the opiates and alcohol for a while, a decade, and plugged into an amplifier, and then stopped all that at the end of the 90s and whatever. I still got the violin. But yeah, I was a teacher for 18 months and fired myself from the position because basically, it's the most important job in the world. And I shouldn't have been there. And I realise that it is the most important job in the world. Because if we're not educated, if we're not taught to be if we're not taught to be like self-motivated, what chance do we have? So I think it's like the noblest profession. It's just underpaid and what a horrific job. But it really, that's why I dedicated it to teachers, because I just think it's the most important job in the world. But I used to, I was given a cassette, like the book has this sort of threads of, there's narrative threads that run through it. The gum is part of it, but the gum is really a metaphor for, like I said, ideas and love and care being needed for them to take flight. But there's also, there's a song that kind of haunts me by a Greek singer called Arletta, and it was a song that I eventually played with Dirty Three. And that's in there, and also sort of people pointing out to me what's going on in the book.
Well, you also speak about your first violin, who's also part of the exhibition where the gum went to.
Yeah.
But the first one doesn't look as good as this one, though.
Well, the first one's lived. This one, who's ever held a violin? Who's never held a violin? Who's never held a violin? Who doesn't have COVID? Who's never held a violin? Somebody, you, come here. It's just a violin. It's just a piece of gum, but it's that thing, that weight that comes to it is exactly what I was trying to write about in the book. Can you play it? Okay. All right. Thank you. That was my big problem writing the book, was how do I write about that in a simple way that people will understand and not just think that it was pretentious. That anytime I tried to write, the book is really simply written. Anytime I tried to load it up with ideas, it just collapsed and just sounded pretentious, and I didn't even believe it myself. So I had to write it from a really simple place and a naive place, because I didn't really know what I was talking about half the time, or what it was about. And it slowly revealed itself to me over the last year writing it.
And the writing itself was kind of a collaboration. You asked friends, help me do this.
I'd ask, when I walked into Faber, they'd called me before the pandemic. A guy had called me and said, a guy, Dan Paps, he's like, I saw you with the Dirty Three and I saw you do your monologues and, they're really funny and you look like you might have something to say. And I'm like, what, like a memoir? And he was like, well, no, but maybe, I don't know, And I said, look, I don't want to write a memoir. It doesn't interest me at all. I mean, there's way more interesting lives than mine that deserved. I hear more interesting lives from cab drivers if you sit half an hour with a cab driver and you start talking to them, or you talk to the guy that makes your shoes and then you realise the life that they've had. Like, there's a lot of interesting lives that nobody never hears about. And anyway, I wasn't interested in writing about my own. And then I saw this thing unfold when the gum was... I get the gum cast and I found someone to do it and eventually take it over. And around that time, I sort of said to Dan, look, I've got this idea for a picture book. And he was like, well, what's it about? And I said, well, it's about a bit of chewing gum I took from Nina Simone's piano in 1999. And I'm getting it cast and da-da-da-da-da like this. And he said, look, I've yelled it around the office. Come in and next time you're in London. So I was over working on a score for Andrew Dominik's film Blonde with Nick. I went in there and I presented this thing. I had my box of copies of the gum and things like that. And after about sort of 50 minutes, they all looked at each other, and one of the heads of Faber just burst into tears when she saw the actual cast of the gum. She just goes, "Oh my God, this is so emotional." And then they just said, "Look, we don't need to discuss this. We want you to write this book." And I went like, "Oh, really? Oh, cool." And then I kind of walked out of there, and then I had a meeting with FKA Twigs, who's this English singer, and I went in. She's like, "I'm sorry, I'm late. I think I just got a book contract." And she's like, "No way." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I told her the story, and she's like, "What? Have you really got her chewing gum?" And I went, "Yeah." And I sort of pulled it out, and she just went like, "No way," like this, and just like took 5 steps back, and she goes, "I don't even want to touch it," and just sort of backed off like this, and she goes, "No way," like this. And you know, I honestly had no idea how to write, and it's probably apparent when you read it because I'm very transparent about it. I had no idea how to write. It's like I was talking to before, you know, saying, "Have you ever made a record?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, it'd be like me giving you a tuba and saying, make a record." Giving me a pen to write a book was a bit like that. You know, I have this history of having a certain relationship to music, which is still a mystery to me, and I still don't know how it works. And I'm as surprised as anybody that I'm still doing it 30 years later. But to sit down and write a book, I mean, I thought it was going to be a few pictures. They said you have to do 20,000 words. I thought that was 10 pages. I told Nick, and he goes like, "Oh, can I write the introduction? What a great idea for a book." So I'm thinking, right, Nick, that's like 2 or 3 pages. So like, fuck, 6, I'll write that on the Ghosting tour, 6 pages, it'll be done. Well, and I sat down, and I couldn't even write like one part. I couldn't write anything. I just looked at this screen, and then a friend of mine died, Hal Wilner, and I reconnected with a mate, Oren Moverman, who was a film director. And he's like, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, you know, lockdown, and I'm doing this record with Marianne Faithfull with poems and blah, 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 like this, and I'm trying to write a book." And he said, "Look, why don't I interview you, and then we'll transcribe it, and you can see where you're at." So I did that, and that's when I realised 20,000 words wasn't 10 pages. But also in actually doing that, I realised I needed to write it. And so then I sat down and I just started writing it. And I would check in with people, Anda Muller-Mister, who had kind of illuminated me to certain things about it. She was just so enamoured with the whole thing, saw the whole sacredness of it, of what it was. I reached out to people that I knew who'd been at the concert and got their sort of opinions of what had happened and things like that. So I sort of was doing detective work, and eventually became this sort of, in a way, it feels like a communal project, the book, in a way, because there's lots of different voices in there. There's Nick in there quite a bit. There's Bledden, the photographer. There's Anne. There's Hannah, a woman who made the cast for me eventually. There's Christina, who runs the Royal Danish Library. There's a lot of different people helping me tell the story. Parts of the story that I didn't know, like our sound guy, Matt, who did the sound check with her. I don't know if you've seen 20,000 Days on Earth, but the sort of immortal champagne, cocaine and sausages was told to him. And so I kind of interviewed him about it. And it felt to me like everybody was kind of helping me kind of tell the story. So it feels like a communal effort in a way, the book. I also kind of, I think because I've had 30 years making music and working in a creative area, it produced this incredible anxiety for me as well, to actually write it, because I thought, shit, people might even read it, you know. And I really couldn't tell, like, what was... I never can tell with music anyway. Half the time I can't tell. And if something shifts in my stomach physically, or if something scares me in the studio, or I don't if I'm afraid of something, I'm like, what is that? That's what I go towards. The thing that makes me, I know what it is, or it makes me feel comfortable. I'm not interested in that. Like, I want to feel challenged by things. Like I even like a concert. I don't see the point in going out and playing greatest hits. I mean, the last tour we did 2 records we'd never played live. That was so, I mean, I don't know, probably frustrating if you wanted to hear the Ship song or something, but, sorry. But, as a performer, it's so integral to be challenged, if you're not challenged, if you don't feel that thrill, how can you expect the audience to pick up on that? Or to feel that from the audience? I'd rather do a concert that falls flat in its face, but you've taken a risk. And you've challenged yourself. And ideas like that work with me and in the studio. And with Nick for 25 years, I've just sat in rooms with him and we barely even talk about what's going on. We just sit down and work. So the actual work thing is, a thing to just sit down and be like practical and work. But then the actual sifting through all the stuff you do and finding what you want to pursue, it's generally about things that you really have a doubt about, but it's not something that you recognise. And the writing thing, I didn't recognise anything at all about it, so you'd think I'd be really up for it, but I wasn't. It was so sort of paralysing. And at some point, I remember Nick called me and he's like, how's it going? And I said, I have no fucking idea. Like, I can't tell. And he goes, well, what's Faber saying to you? And I said, well, they think it's getting in good shape. And he goes, well, listen to them because they're not being paid to tell you it's good. It's not their job to do that. So I listened, it was really good advice. I listened to what they were telling me because I just couldn't tell. With the book, what was going on, where it was going. But I knew when I'd got through to the end, I'd got through their process on their terms, which was sort of all I actually... I'm not very good with failure, just on a personal level. Like, I will fight for an idea in the studio until someone says, Warren, it's not a good idea. And they drag... That's how I met Nick, he has this thing too, and it was over a song that everyone said, this is no good, and why don't you try this? And he's like, what? And then he said, come in tomorrow. I'll fight for an idea if I believe in it, and I won't give up until somebody just goes, it's been 2 days, it's time to move on. And with this, with the book, I was sort of, when I got to the end of the process with it, I figured, that was enough for me. It's been out for 2 months now, and the kind of reception to it, and it's been really encouraging, but I just didn't expect it at all, to be honest. It's been really... amazing it still continues, the book finishes at a certain time, but I've been talking to Christina, she didn't want to take it, but it's going to go on tour. So like I said, I've got this picture of it, it's all wrapped up, it's going on tour with the exhibition. The Barbican, where she did the concert, they contacted me. They want to kind of archive it and keep it and take care of the towel and stuff like that, Faber have a copy of it. It's going in the vaults with T.S. Eliot and Sylvia Plath manuscript. How fucking awesome, It's going in their archive. It's beautiful, It's going in their archives, in their vaults and things like that. In the book I talk about, we talk about making a sculpture with Anne de Mullermister, and I want to make 7 of them and stick them in places around the world, like the North Pole, the South Pole, in a rainforest. I wanted to put one in the Statue of Liberty, like the size of a heart, all these things like that, on Ellis Island. But at the start of this year, I met this amazing woman who comes from here, Femke den Haas, who's just the most extraordinary woman, and I bought some land and donated it, and I've built an animal sanctuary, and it's called Ellis Park, and I'm putting a fucking piece of gum there. So you plant these ideas. It's a park for animals with special needs. We're building like Noah's Ark for the broken animals. So we have toothless bears and we have armless monkeys. Our first resident moved in yesterday, and Femke is from here. She's from the Hague. So you need to build a statue to her because she's just extraordinary, this woman. She really is. She's amazing. You know, and for me, it's all part of the same narrative of this book. This thing of getting ideas out there, the community grabs a hold and they take flight. The park was about that. I wanted to do something. I enabled these people who were doing an extraordinary work, and I was in a position to have a profile where I could say, like, we need to build enclosures. We need to build a school. We're building a school. We're building a hospital. We're building a place for people to learn about the animal trade over there. I want to build a place for elephants to go and die. I want to go there and peel bananas and get back on the gear and just kick me in a hole and plant a coconut tree on me at the end of my life. I mean, you know, it's this thing about how people get under them. Ideas need people. They need love and care. And the park, for me, is what this book is about. I put it out there. There's the most beautiful community of people around it, cheering on this little gibbon yesterday, you know, who has one arm and one foot. She spent 23 years locked up in a cage, and yesterday was the first time she's been out in the open. And I literally, all yesterday on the train, I just couldn't stop crying, and I still can't actually, because, you know, ultimately people, we can do really fucked up things, but we can do great things, and I wanted this book to be about wonder and awe. And it was written at a time when everything was in chaos, and I just didn't want to buy into the rage machine after a while. I couldn't give a fuck about Donald Trump. I mean, I just thought, what the fuck, you know? We're greater than that. And so the book is about wonder and awe. And the next chapter is I'm going to go on a boat with a pith hat and a safari suit and take this stone rendering of the gum for the bears and the monkeys to piss on and climb all over. And you know, I love this idea that a narrative, it engages the imagination in people. Ideas do that, and we are ideas. We engage other people's imagination. That's kind of like what it's about.
Let's see, you want to read a part of it? I have one chapter
all right.
I really liked. It's about lost and found objects, which is kind of...
All right. Actually, I'm a bit superstitious, as you'll find out when you read my book. I'm weird. I've got OCD or some fucking thing. I don't know what's going on, but I have to read it from my book.
Oh,
you know, otherwise it's just going to destroy everything, because we're going so well at the moment. What page was it?
83.
83. So, you know, it made me look at that. I have this. I mean, who collects stuff? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like who has, you know, little things that mean nothing to anybody else, like, but to you, they mean something. And our memory is what defines us. And these little things, for me, when I started touring, I could have this little briefcase and all the good stuff was in there, because I had no place. I didn't live anywhere, and, you know, my world changed. But I loved having a briefcase with stuff in it that it was just nothing, you know. But they were little things that reminded me of stuff, and I realised I had these boxes all over the house of little things and stuff like that. And I think that I think that was the thing, with the gum. I realised the gum was bigger than all that stuff because people had this connection to Nina Simone that was beyond like the pair of slippers that your child wore, that every time you look at them you remember the day they stood in poo or something, and you whatever. Like, or the spoon that you stole from the diner or something, back in '84 or something. And there was something about it that had a bigger importance. It was more worldly, and so because I'd been taking care of it for 20 years, I wanted to let it go into the world. But in doing so, I realised that I have a bit of an OCD thing going on as well. The things we collect. This is chapter 17 from my book, Nina Simone's Gum. The things we collect are the things that are of significance to us first and foremost. Outside your orbit and people connected, they have no significance. They're specific things. These things that are precious to us are really just precious to us. For some reason, I have a hard time throwing out shoes that have served me well. I had a cupboard full of worn shoes in the corridor, and eventually I started photographing each pair to allow myself to get rid of them. There's a connection there. I just can't seem to let them go. Shoes I've used only for concerts. Shoes that you can't repair anymore. Shoes that have been repaired one too many times. I threw out the shoes. A few years later, I lost all the photos. I was in a candy store in Los Angeles in 2008. One of my sons had been told he could buy a certain amount of sweets. When he arrived, his friends had full bags, and he looked at his bag that was rather meagre and burst into tears. He threw it on the ground and walked out, and then he didn't want the candy. I guess he understood it's not always awesome to doing the right thing, the injustice of it all. I can still see his face of total distress and heartbreak. I kept the bag with a couple of sweets in it. I placed it in a tin in the kitchen. Every time I saw it, it broke my heart. So I just kept it for 10 years until it just melted into some sort of gelatin goop sitting there in the plastic candy bag. It became a running joke with me and my son. "You still have that candy?" he would ask me. One day I looked and the bag was empty. Some ants ate it, I guess. I feel good when I see an ant in a puddle of tears in my house, still digesting the saddest little goop of candy on the planet. I have this postcard that Dave McComb sent me in 1996 when he had his heart transplant. I played in a band with him in the early 90s. He was the lead singer of the Triffids, and Martin P. Casey, the bassist, would become the bassist in the Bad Seeds. David asked me to join his band after seeing Dirty Three one night in 1991. I loved him. In 1992, the year the Adelaide bikers made beige amphetamine and left indie rockers' ankles rattling in their boots, I arrived at his house for a first rehearsal. I'd been to a trash and treasure sale. That's like where you just empty all the shit out of your house and stick it in a drive-in, and then you take a lot of speed and go along and just buy all this stuff that you just don't need. I arrived at his house for the first rehearsal. In the boot of my 67 HR Holden was a wooden bird cage, ornate ceramic vases, a big sign saying yes, some Ugg boots. They're those sort of woolen slippers that became quite fashionable a few years ago that just bogans wore in the 70s in Australia. Velvet cushions, a box of snow globes, painted pine cones, 100 wooden coat hangers tied together with pantyhose, a box of wooden cotton reels, 14 oil paintings tied together with stockings, a box of keys, a collection of Winnie the Pooh books. Proof, Dave said, the bikers had it right. The postcard has a big sticker of a red heart on the back of it, an ancient emoji from the last century. He wasn't totally sure I was in London, but sent me some cassettes to Latimer Road. When Dave passed away, 2nd of February 1999, it made me rethink my game plan, changed my life. I couldn't face his funeral. I was totally fucked up on drugs and alcohol in Melbourne. I'd been sleeping on my brother Murray's couch for a week, unable to move except to pass out from drinking. He looked at me one day and just said, "What the fuck are you doing?" I had no answer. This little guy who's watched over me most of my adult life. I got in a plane loaded, continued drinking on the plane, continued from the airport to my apartment in Paris, decided if I arrived alive in Paris, then I'd get clean and sober up. I realised that my lifestyle was adversely affecting the music I was making. Without this decision, I would have had a very different creative output from 1999 onwards. I woke in Paris and started day one. I understood I needed to do this for me and no one else. The same year I saw that concert of Nina Simone and became custodian of the Gum, and I got married. It was the year I weighed up what was important to me. Throughout my entire life, music seems to have continually been taking care of me, watching over me. The card of David McComb was in my Samsonite briefcase until 2001. Then I transferred it to my suitcase when I retired the briefcase. I've had that postcard in every suitcase I've ever had that's toured with me. I finally left it in an archive in the Melbourne Arts Centre in 2019 when they proposed taking care of my artefacts. It was the first thing I offered them to start my collection. I knew I would lose it one of these days. What I have to do in the afterward, this is a picture of the postcard. The book has got lots of pictures. There's about 100 pictures of all the things I talk about and the process of making the gum and all that. But what I neglected to mention in there was that card basically has kept me sober for 22 years. The power that you can invest in something like that. You know, I mean, I did primal scream therapy, I did AA, I did NA. I didn't want to write it, but the book is not about that. But the fact that having that card to me in my case was enough, knowing it was there. It reminded me of Dave. It reminded me of this moment in my life that I didn't want to be in. And for some reason, I invested this power into this worthless little card. That having that, I believe that having that would keep me clean. And there's something about, I think if you buy into the higher power thing, there's something about that at work. It's a bit like I was saying, if you can create your world, create your God, create what you believe in, and that's the world. And you know, I just always had that card. And weirdly, the day that I handed in the final draft of the book, and they said, that's it, there's no more editing, no more this, no more that, I was cleaning out a cupboard in my mother-in-law's flat in Paris, and in the back of the cupboard was an old suitcase that I used to travel with in the early 90s. I don't know what I used to wear because it was so tiny. I don't even think we used to wash anything. I mean, it was incredible. It was just like really small. I mean, I need 2 suitcases these days to get around and a bunch of suits and blah, blah, blah and all this stuff, you know. I mean, it was the tiniest little case, but that was all that I used to travel. I guess I just had maybe a pair of socks in there or something. But inside this case was letters from Dave McComb, who's in the book, like all these letters from him. Mick Geyer, who's a guy that was in the book, is in the book as well. And the original ticket to the concert of Nina Simone. And a script from Oren Moverman that he gave me the night I met him, who helped me sort of with the initial draft of the book. All sitting in this case the day I handed it in, and somehow, I mean, you know, I couldn't help but think, and they're all, 3 of those people are dead. I couldn't help but think they were just saying, it's all right, kid, let it go. Like, you've done your work, you know. The serendipity around it, I know you can write a narrative to things, but the serendipity around this gum, around the people that were drawn to it, I found incredibly moving. That continues to this day. Anybody that believes in it, you know, they come towards it. And I think ultimately it's just that love and care is the thing that we need to help us evolve, to find our better selves.
Okay, let's see. Anybody in the audience who has a question for Warden Ellis? Just raise your hand and we'll... Okay, let's start.
I
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Well, it's a pleasure. You know, it's incredible to music. You sort of make it. You do the concerts, but you know you never stop being moved when somebody tells you that it's had an effect on them. What you do, you know, it's and you know again, just to sort of with the book, I realised that like if this, I didn't get this gum out into the world. It was like an idea that was locked away, you know. So ideas don't live until people like yourself have taken them on and integrated them in your life. And that's when a piece of art exists, you know, a painting, a film, whatever. They only exist when you get it into you and take it on. You sort of take control of it. And what the creator meant really is of no importance at all. It often undermines. I find this much easier to talk about than a record, because a record seems to diminish, I think, the effect for people. Music works on such a sort of emotional level and spiritual level. You don't even have to explain what it does. It affects you in a way. You don't have to explain what it's all about or have the terminology. And I think, you know, I stopped talking about music years ago because I just felt like it was boring everybody and doing a disservice to the thing. So, you know, thank you. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. That's fabulous. I mean, I think the best compliment you can give a book is one that tells you stuff about yourself that reads you. You know, like when somebody's going da 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 like that. You know, like you don't need. I stopped reading for 10 years or something because I just decided I wanted to be a drunk. I didn't want to read about one. I wanted to know what it was about. I didn't want to kind of read somebody's experience, you know, about it. So I sort of closed the books down, listened to music a lot, and just kind of went on my merry way. But you're right, the sort of storytelling, I mean, that was going back into that too, was there was no evidence of it. You know, I had to kind of dig away. And things like that used to be passed on word of mouth. You'd go like, fuck this concert, you know, like, and nothing was witnessed by the iPhone phenomenon. I mean, that's just how it is now, you know, but that I didn't realize until I was writing it what a different time it was before then, you know, and that I was dealing with that because I couldn't find, I have 10 photos of her on stage. That's the only 10 that my friend took of the concert, you know. There's no recording of it. There's no filming of it. So it exists in the imagination and it kind of just gets bigger and bigger, you know. And yeah, it's this passing on word of mouth that's so beautiful, such a beautiful thing. Yeah. We can bring it back. We couldn't. Yeah, I mean, I have to say that the last year, the pandemic, you know, not to make little of it, like, because so many people suffered with it, you know, but there was a sense of community that I hadn't felt for a long time, you know. I could see people organising benefits and stuff for places that were closing down, and, you know, I got involved. You know, after that, I've never really got involved with anything at all, but I was giving broken bows and, you know, I sell my shoes to sort of feed monkeys now, you know. It's just the greatest feeling, you know, and that came from last year, this sense of seeing people trying to connect with people I didn't even know, deliver meals and things like that, you know. So I don't know, that sense of community also is a bit that sort of telling of stories as well. checking in on people and stuff, you know. I like storytelling because apparently when you recall the story, it's not like coming from the deep memory. It comes back out, and when it comes back out the next time, it's different. Like you have no chance at all. So it's just like Chinese whispers, the whole thing. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Okay.
You said earlier ago that nowadays you have a lot of ways to listen to music, right? So like Spotify. Yeah. And whatnot. And from a producer's point of view, I know that there's a lot nowadays that you can do in the studio. Like you only have to open up your computer. There's a million amount of plugins that you can use, and quadrillion even more instruments. How do you take that philosophy back into your studio? Do you focus on? Are you just like me, a gear collector? No, I don't know. No, but I just accept the times are the times now. You know, I remember an interview with Brian Eno did, and he said, you know, I can make an ambient record now in the time that it takes to plug in with someone who doesn't even know what they're doing. And you have to remember that back in the day when they were doing those records, it was a whole thought thing going on. They had to construct them, you know, the looping of the tapes and all this stuff. But that's just how things, I mean, you know, you don't see the carpenter crying because IKEA has taken everybody, you know, the Uber, everything has changed. You know, the film world has changed, you know, everything has changed. So, I mean, we're all a bit in this position. All I'm concerned with is the work. The work is the important thing for me. And I'll use whatever I can to make that happen. So Pro Tools, if this is boring, you know, I couldn't do a soundtrack without modern technology. The only reason that I've done 40 scores, or whatever, 30, don't know how many, but or the only reason that I can do as much as I can is because there's the technology for me to just go like next one, you know, like, I mean, I don't take long on it. 5 days I make a record, you know. Me and Nick did Carnage in 6 days, I think, totally, and then mixed it. And Ghost Team was a bit longer. That was like 2 weeks, but a lot of kind of back and, you know, there was a year and a half in between the demos and then getting it realised. But no, you know, like I would rather move through, do more, than just sit and correct stuff all the time and kind of, you know. So I love that affords me the possibility of working more tape. I learned a different way, which was that you just have to commit to something. You don't get a million shots at it, and you got to play. If you play as a band, you play as a band, you know. So I just take whatever that there is, you know. We have streaming now, and that's how it is, you know. Like the great thing about, you know, I see my kids, they just discover all this stuff now, you know, like that. They just flick through things, they find stuff, you know. I mean, I just kind of, everybody's competing in the same with the same problems and the same. The great thing is people hear our music and they come to our shows, you know. I mean, it's just how you find the stuff. That's more the thing I was talking about. Like, how do you find it out there, you know, in this sort of mountain of stuff these days? Apart from the vinyl, obviously, but do you have any other favorite studio equipment that you use? I'll play anything as long as it's not a trumpet. Like, you know, I play a synthesizer. I'll play anything. Like, I'll get a sound out of a couple of coconuts if you give me them. Yeah, but trumpets, no, or trombones and something like. I don't know why, but yeah. I mean, but you know, I'm not very talented on anything, but I really have a minimal set of skills that I kind of, you know, try to kind of push into another area. So I play different instruments because it allows me to go into it in a different way. You know, I've never was one that sat down and just technically practiced and that. It was just about the sound, how it moved me, the emotion. You know, I'm drawing from the same small pool of stuff as most people. Like I said, I'm like a bottom, swimming on the bottom there, in the mud. We're all just doing the breaststroke down there, and then there's these other people kind of up there. But, I pick up instruments all the time that I have no idea what to do with them. Like I bought a synthesizer in Japan. The microkorg. I don't like to buy anything over a couple of £100, and just because I like little things. I like those little synths a lot. But I couldn't work out what to do, and I took it into Grinder Man, and everyone just looked at me like, you're in the wrong fucking band, I was sitting there, and I just put it down. It was a sort of walk of shame. But then, I tried on the 2 Grinder. I gave up, and I didn't really know what was going on with it. But then, I turned up for a score west of Memphis, and I didn't have my violin. And Nick's like, "What are you doing?" And I go, "I'm not playing the violin." And sat down, and we did this score west of Memphis. But out of that came Push the Sky Away. Out of that came Jubilee Street. Out of that came Skeleton Tree, Ghosteen, because it launched me. It gave me the sort of confidence doing that score and just committing to like, okay, I'm only going to play the microkorg. It sort of freed me up, and I think my whole creative life has been about that, trying to free things up. Scores free me up unbelievably. I remember making Jesse James, and I just thought we couldn't do what Andrew wanted, and I thought this is the day it all stops. And I have this superstition about that. One day it's just all going to stop. I get in the studio. I never expect anything. I don't expect things to happen. I don't just assume something will happen. I've always been in deference to the process. And you might think, oh yeah, come on, you've been doing it. The 30 years is a mystery to me as well, to be honest. I somehow landed with the right people, which is again what the book is about. How does this sort of these acts happen? How does this serendipity happen? But I remember being in. I always had this thing of like, oh, it's going to stop one day, or one day I'll go in and nothing will happen, and I thought this happened with Jesse James, but then we just couldn't get this piece of music that Andrew wanted, and we were really struggling, and then I just thought, oh, that's it. And so I just walked out in the studio and sat down, and I said, right, give me a track, and just started. And then from that, then went in, and Nick and I started working on it. From that came probably the piece that they'll be playing when I'm gone, but it's a piece called Song for Bob, which is the big piece at the end of the film. That came out of that morning. I just thought my career in music was over. But I learned from that you just have to work. I thought when I made a great record, that was the end of it. So, and I don't think about what I've done in the past. When we made Ghosteen, I thought that was the end of our relationship. I thought, there's no way I can ever do anything better than that record. Now, I've made stuff since and I've re-thought about my relationship to that sort of thing, that it is really about getting in there and working. But for 30 years, I was like, when I do something really good, it's the end, It served me well anyway for 30 years. But I'm really glad that I can still, that I've continued to make stuff, that we made Carnage, and I've just finished the most beautiful documentary on snow leopards that comes out in December. It's incredible. And we've done Andrew's film Blonde, which is absolutely amazing. And making a film with Nick that I was just mixing in London. So it's continued, like believing in the process, and just doing the work.
Okay, I think we have time.
I have to say, I can honestly say that there's a couple of moments in 30 years it felt like things fell from the sky. I could tell you them, like on this hand. The rest of it has just been about turning up, sitting there and doing the work. That's what it's... The inspiration stuff, the inspiring thing, or all that sort of thing, I don't know. It's just been about sitting down, working through the failure, working through the kind of the anxiety. And writing the book was about that for me, working through that anxiety. If I wrote another one, I'd probably be just as anxious. But it's actually turning up is really important. Even if deep down you don't think you can do it. Because if you don't turn up, you know what's going to happen. Like nothing.
Okay, thank you for turning up tonight.
Thank you for having me. The first piece of music I ever wrote, it's called Indian Love Song on from the Dirty Three, and I think I was thinking about it today. It's the first bit of music that I formally wrote, I think, and it's just a really simple little riff that goes, and we constructed this kind of symphony over it, me, Mick and Jim, but that idea came from a few years before where I misheard a double bass player in the orchestra. He was playing Kind of Blue, and I started playing. I thought, oh, that's really cool, what's he playing? And I walked up and said, were you just playing that? And he said, no, I was playing Kind of Blue. And I was like, oh, and I remembered it, and that riff became that. And I love that because that seems like where ideas come from. This simple little thing that I heard that later becomes something else because of other people. Yeah.
I don't recognize it.
Huh?
I don't recognize it.
Well, there's a song in the book I talk about. It's by a Greek composer. It's called I Remember a Time When Once You Used to Love Me. I'll just play it for you. If you'd been hitchhiking around Europe in 1988, you would have seen a bummed out little guy from Australia playing that in the streets of Glasgow. It's weird, you know, that song I played for 30 years with Mick and Jim, and every time I play it like that, I feel them. I don't see them, but I feel them there. An amazing thing playing music with people. And be on the stage is the greatest honour, I think, for me. Oh, it's always such a great honour to be on the stage. It's a sacred place, and it's a lot of that is due to the fact that the audience that comes along are willing to go to that sacred place as well, to be a part of that communion. I missed that during the lockdown, like I'm sure you all did too. So thank you all for coming. It's really good to see things start up again, and I hope winter's okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren Ellis.